Welcome, everyone. I wish you could be behind the scenes before these shows start because people are cracking up. And I'm thrilled for it. This has been a joy to have these conversations with these panelists. Every Tuesday and Thursday, a new episode comes out. You can go to bizbookpublishinghub.com to check it out. I hope you stay tuned to watch this one and all the other lives that I've got planned. Without any further delay, let me introduce the whole show and these panelists. Have you ever thought of your book as a business card that opens doors? It's not just about selling copies, it's about the ripple effects your book creates in your industry and beyond. From attracting the right clients to building a reputation as a thought leader, a book can position you for success in ways you never imagined. But it requires more than just publishing. It needs a plan to engage your audience and amplify your message. And that's why I created the Biz Book Publishing Hub. Our experts and community members are here to help you navigate every stage from writing to publishing and beyond. You can get started at bizbookpublishinghub.com. Now, I'm excited to introduce today's panelists who will share their stories of transformation through their books. Lisa DeAngelis wrote Embracing the Unknown, Exploring the Pathways to Change, a thoughtful guide that empowers readers to navigate and embrace sustainable change through curiosity, awareness, and intentional choices. Dr. Mara Karpel wrote The Passionate Life, Creating Vitality and Joy at Any Age, a transformative guide blending psychology, personal wisdom, and holistic health principles to help readers cultivate a vibrant, joyful, and meaningful life, no matter their age or challenges. Susan Fitzell wrote Neurodiversity in the Workplace, Maximizing Success Through Inclusive Dynamic Workplace Design, a comprehensive guide that equips leaders with actionable strategies to build inclusive, innovative teams by harnessing the untapped potential of neurodivergent talents. Please join me in welcoming Lisa, Mara, and Susan. Welcome all. And Lisa, I'm going to kick things off with you. I would love to get a better sense of who your audience was, the book that you wrote.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you fellow authors and dig into our books. My ideal reader is the curious, ambitious, intentional business professional who recognizes that navigating change in their career or work life doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's because they really understand what it means to change in any given moment and in an ongoing way. And they're really ready to utilize the tools and resources that will allow them to show up as the best version of themselves over and over again, growing in alignment with the journey of their life as it unfolds. I explore the elusive question, what is the secret to change, for anyone who wants to dig in deeper?
Awesome. We're going to dig in deeper as we get into this call. But let's hear now from Mara. Mara, who's your book intended for?
Well, thank you, Robbie, for having me here. And it seems like I'm on a panel with other authors who are on the same path, really, very similar path. My background has been in geriatric psychology and working with caregivers, as well as working with veterans and people with disabilities, as well as people of all ages and all abilities. And one thing that I noticed in my work is that the one key to living with joy is having meaning and purpose in life. And that can happen at any age. I've had 100-year-olds who had meaning and purpose in their life, and they were very happy, no matter their physical ability, if they were in a wheelchair or nursing home. And so I wrote a book really that's meant for people of all ages, mainly people who are going through some sort of transition in their life, whether they're an aging transition like retirement, or maybe they've come to the point in their life where they say, hey, you know, I have focused my whole life on raising my family and following the path that I, you know, was supposed to follow, what I was expected to follow, and now I want to make a change. So it can be big changes like that, or even small changes that I just want to live with more passion. And so really it's for everybody, but I have noticed that the people that are drawn to it are people who are kind of in their middle years and older, but I've had a lot of younger readers as well who are still trying to
Wonderful.
figure it out.
Thank you. And how about you, Susan? I'd love to hear kind of, you have several books behind you, but what's the book we were talking about today? Who was the audience for this book?
Neurodiversity in the workplace is targeted to individuals like C-suite people and senior leaders who are responsible for driving organizational culture. And it's there because if their culture fosters innovation and new patents and success, the company's going to be more successful. And that's what C-suites want. And neurodiversity, or having divergent thinking, if you want to look at neurodiversity, it's divergent thinking. People who think differently. They're not all saying the same thing. That is who it's for. It's for I've gotten a lot of calls from HR leaders, recruiters, DEI professionals, and people who run ERGs, employee resource groups, who are looking for information on neurodiversity in the workplace and how to support their people. And so for those people, it's also a really great handbook that they can pick the chapter they want, go right to what they need, and find actionable strategies. And it's also, I'm finding, for individuals, because every time I do a presentation or a webinar or a keynote on this, people come up to me and say, I'm neurodivergent. How can I make that known in the workplace and still be safe? That has been that was a surprise. So I ended up changing the last chapter of the book to be for the employee, where my original idea was keep it for the leadership. Now I've also realized that individuals and their allies also need those strategies.
It is, Mara, you kind of pointed this out already, and this happens all the time. The three of you are here mostly based on your schedule availability, and yet there's clearly a connection. I mean, all of you are about change in one form or another, and the fact that it's something you can guide people through and help people be more curious about what else is possible. I love that we have this in common. Susan, I'm going to stick with you for a moment. First of all, you have several books. What number book is this for you that you published?
17. That includes the multiple editions. All right. So to be fair, some of them I count, if I've got 3 editions of a book, then I've counted as 3 books.
As you should.
But okay, go ahead.
I was going to ask you to go back in the Wayback Machine to that first time you were writing a book, if you can recall what you thought wasn't going to be important, as far as like, this book's going to be a success if only I blank, versus like, what have you learned since then? Like, what is the focus you had this time that was maybe different than earlier ways that you've published books?
My very first book was called Free the Children, Conflict Education for Strong, Peaceful Minds. A very esoteric title that didn't get me anywhere. I was very much into the getting the message out. It was on bullying prevention. I sure wish I had just called it bullying prevention, so people knew that's what it was. But I believe it's a great book, and it's still out there and available for people to support students or children, because it's written for teachers and parents. However, nowadays, if I could go back, I would think about, how do you title a book? How do you make it searchable? How do you make sure the people Googling, because there was no Google in 1996, I think, when I wrote that book. So how do you title it so that when people are searching for help, I need help because I've got these odd ducks in the workplace and I'm not sure how to deal with them. They're really talented, but they're not getting along. What do we do? And so, or I don't want a harassment lawsuit because I'm not accommodating people. So now when they're asking those questions, that is what they're typing into Google. How do I blah? That's what I now know needs to be in the title and the subtitle and the keywords of my book. And also to be very practical, although my first book was very practical, but the other pieces of it are larger, make it easier to read. The first book, you need a magnifying glass to read it because my publishing company wanted to stick to a budget. So yeah, it was, I learned a lot about what not to do after my first book.
I mean, that's probably for most of us. Like if we go and do multiple books, because the lessons learned need to be applied somewhere. I feel like I knew by the end of the first book, I had to do books 2 and 3 because everyone told me the only way to sell book 1 was to have books 2 and 3. But also all those lessons hard learned can finally be put to use in some way.
Yeah.
Lisa, how about you? You know, is this your first book?
It is. It was my first book. So it's very funny listening to Susan's reflections, because in my case, it was a little bit like trying to tell someone what your new job is going to be like before you started, or trying to decide how you're going to parent before you have a child. Good intentions are one thing, but reality is quite another. So it makes me laugh a little bit because I think I carried so many of the markers of current traditional success. Maybe I would wake up one morning and I would have gone viral. Maybe I'll make a bestseller list. And all of that stuff is so based on a very, very, very tiny percentage of what we see. And I think the biggest indicator of success for me that's shifted is this idea that these external metrics really are what I was driving toward. Whereas now it's so much more about quality over quantity. It is so much more about resonance rather than just being in a relevant space. I'm really craving this situation where people will walk away not just nodding their head, but really thinking differently or asking themselves a question that they wouldn't have even considered before. And knowing that I can affect someone's life in any way without ever having even known them personally, just through my words and my stories, feels like the biggest marker of success for me now that my book is out into the world. And that's not even something I ever would have known to track or to look for. So it already, for me, in book 1, in a very short period of time over, the last year and a half or so, has been a really, really quick up and down journey of what success means and how that shows up in relation to me, but also my book.
Well, I love the analogies you drew around like what kind of parent you're going to be before you have children, or describing the job you haven't yet started. I do think that new authors like have high hopes. And usually it's about, book sales or hitting number 1. Some of them it's just getting the book published, like period, full stop, because it's such a big unknown. And you're describing all the other ways the book allows you to have impact. And so we'll come back to some of those things. But first, I want to bring Mara into this conversation. Mara, is this your first book, or do you?
This is my first book.
Congratulations to the two of you! Like,
thank you.
Super awesome. We all hope to be Susan one day, but that's a different story. So, Mara, when you were getting started writing this book, were there any particular metrics? Like I just listed a few options. Was there anything that you particularly had your eye on, and maybe you've changed your mind about what's important? Like, how do you think about success then and now?
Yeah. Well, this book came out in 2018. That was when it was published. I'm now working on the second edition of it and a second book in addition to that. And my vision is a little bit different. When I started, I think I had those traditional metrics, like how many books am I going to sell? Will I make money from the book? Which, really most authors do not make money from their book, or enough money to cover the actual process of writing the book. I mean, I think it costs more money to write the book than I had made in sales. But what has turned out to be much more successful for me is that it got me in the door to do presentations, which I found that I love. I have a radio program that's been on since 2012, and that started before the book, but they've kind of worked together, and it helped to boost the radio program, and the radio program has helped to boost the book. I've used some of the interviews and some of the early interviews in this book, and I plan to use more of the interviews in my next book. So really, I feel like when I wrote this book, I was kind of on that journey of transition myself. I was turning 50. Now I'm turning 63. Obviously I didn't start writing. I didn't publish it when I was 50, but it was in my mind. I started thinking about it at that point. And I'm in the next transition of my life. What do I want to do next? I don't want to retire, but I want to transition into doing more writing. I've gotten the other part is I've gotten blogs into Huffington Post. I've gotten blogs into Thrive Global. I'm on Medium. I have a pretty good audience. So those to me are metrics. It's not about the money coming in, but maybe moving into the next step of my professional life, giving more talks.
I want to just underscore something Mara just said, which I think everyone listening needs to hear again. Please don't go into this thinking you're going to make money from book sales, especially not individual book sales. The only time I focus on individual book sales is when I am doing the launch and we're focusing on getting reviews that are verified reviews, and therefore people have purchased the book. And it's your launch team that are leaving the reviews, and you're really just like really aiming to get the review, which means you're going to get a sale. And if you have, put yourself in the right categories, you have a chance of hitting number one, but it's a byproduct, not the focus. It's really by getting those reviews. And after that, it's the bulk sales. And Mara, you were just talking about getting opportunities to speak. I know Susan does this professionally as well. Those are the opportunities, and I'd love to explore in a minute what that's been for you. But before that, I really want to stick with reviews, which is kind of a happy space for me and not for most people. Although this panel, it's a rare thing where all of you are about kind of equally doing well. Sometimes we have a panel where there's like person with like 4 reviews and someone else with like 87, but you're all doing exceptionally well. And so we're going to start over here with Susan, and I've had the fortune of getting to support her in her launch, and we're gearing up to have a party soon to celebrate your success. So you have 40 total ratings and 39 reviews. And I should explain to those listening that the ratings are the stars. You can leave a star rating 1 through 5 without buying anything and without writing anything. So if you were to just get a bunch of stars, not that hard, but there's no substance behind it. So I think it's awesome. You have 39 out of 40 people took time to write something. In fact, I also saw the Lisa's book has 30 out of 30. So I really want to know what you did, because that's cool. And then we've got Mara's book, 36 ratings and 24 reviews. Anytime people have more than 20 written reviews, I know you made an effort. It's not easy to get people to actually take the time to publish a written review. It takes so much work. I tell my clients to aim for 50, mostly because it requires a process that will get them close to that or beyond that. And it wakes up their network in the process. That's how we do it. Lisa, what was your approach? How did you even know to focus on reviews? And then what did you go about doing in order to get them?
Yes. Reviews are sort of the bane of my process, to be completely honest. Thank you for the reflection that is a good effort, because there are moments when I get very down on myself thinking, gosh, I know legitimately there are many more people who have read the book, and many more friends, many more family members, and who don't go leave reviews. And it really, I just want to underscore, it is so meaningful to authors. It is actually probably the most meaningful thing you can do to support, especially a newer author, is to just leave a review. Even if you said, I loved reading this, I learned a lot. That is actually really helpful to other people who are coming. So that's my PSA. I will step back down off that soapbox. But I will say I was very fortunate, because I actually wrote my book through a community writing program that did a lot of work to support me in the writing and eventually the publishing process. And so there was a lot of education around the things that are challenges for authors in this landscape. And so I was able to sort of front those. I ran a pretty solid pre-sale campaign to help fund the publishing of the book. And so through that process, I was able to sell well over 200 copies of the book before it even published. And part of that was those people who were early readers, who were involved from the beginning. And then they were many of those that left reviews. But it takes a lot of reaching out and saying, this would be really helpful for me. Do you need a little bit of support around what that looks like? Can I send you some ideas, or, have a brief conversation with you to tell you what would be helpful or help you decide what to write? Because some people just get a little overwhelmed. They think it's a big ask. And so just a little bit of breaking down that barrier seemed to help quite a bit. I still have a whole list of close friends and some family members who I have, on regular 6-month intervals, I'll say, hey, remember when I asked you about that? I don't think you ever did. Maybe we could revisit that. But I've really had to just take a step back and say that for me, moving on to different pieces of how I want to grow my brand and my book in the world has been the focus. And whenever I see a review pop up, it actually is quite heartwarming. So it just is an extra bonus at this point. And yeah, it's been a journey, that's for sure.
So a couple of things you just said I want to kind of pull out. One, I want to mention that while we could go to friends and family to get reviews, one, be careful of the Amazon rules around that. And two, if your friends and family aren't likely prospects or referral partners, you're putting a lot of energy into getting written reviews from people who probably don't really understand what you do or the importance of it, and don't know anyone who needs your support. And they probably are the least likely to understand the importance of a review versus you could also ask a community of authors who may not be your prospects either. But at least a community of authors are going to get it. The best reviews will be from people who are your prospects and referral partners. So that way, as a business owner, you're having conversations with the same people that you want to be having conversations with. But Mara, I'm curious how you approach this. Again, anything past 20 means you did business. This was work. So how did you approach this? Why were reviews important to you?
Well, I have to be honest with you. I didn't do a lot of work in reaching out for reviews. When I first published the book, I worked with a company that did a lot of pushing the book before it hit Amazon, so that it became a #1 bestseller on Amazon in the category of personal transformation around the world. So it became an international bestseller, and I think that attracted people to the book and want to write a review. And I would just say, hey, if you read the book, could you write a review? But I'm learning from this, because honestly, I did not do a lot of work in reaching out and asking for reviews.
So
it
you
was
probably
more
have
of a casual.
Yeah, you have way more reviews in your wings than the
Probably.
people. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing you could do, both of the two newer authors, if people have ever sent you a kind word on email or in a social post or in a private message, copy and paste it back to them with the instructions for how to post. It just takes the steps down to oh, I could do that. They already sent you a nice thing.
Well, I actually used it as those things as a testimonial. So I would ask them, can I write that as a testimonial? Which, if you go to my book, there's 2 pages of testimonials and the back cover. So I was focused on that more than the Amazon reviews.
So I'm going to come to why I think reviews are important. But since Susan decided to work with me, I want to know why Susan thought this was important and decided this book, she was going to do something a little different and get this kind of outside, team to get the book out in this way. So Susan, what was important to you around reviews? What have you learned from other books that you've done about this process? And why did we end up working together?
Well, I've written a lot of books, and my last one was I think 6 years ago. And it's time for an update. It needs a 5th edition. And I really didn't know or understand about the importance of reviews or even launching a book until my last 3 updates of my 3 big education books. And when I was writing this one, for those books, I at least have a mailing list. I've been working in the education sector for a long time, several decades. And for this one, it's a whole new audience. And so I knew, whereas all my other books were for parents and teachers and educators, and that's sort of, of a target audience, this one was for corporate leaders, HR, people who are neurodivergent themselves, and so on and so forth, nonprofits. I have a bit of a following for them, but it's a new space for me. So I realized that it was going to be that much more important for me to do the extra work to make sure my launch was successful. And I found you. I already had known about you, knew about your reputation, saw your webinar, watched it, and went, oh my gosh, this is great. The person who led my last 2 launches retired. And so I needed somebody, and I got you. And I learned so much in the process about how to go about this and get the reviews. And honestly, out of all the books I've published, this current book has more reviews than any of my others.
That's
so
awesome.
Everything you taught me worked.
And were there any surprises? Because, you built this list of people. Like you said, you had to do some work because the list was not ready made, but you had to go through your network and try to find, whether it was your LinkedIn list or wherever are the lists. Did that lead to conversations that lead to new revenue discussions or media opportunities?
What I realized was I'm thinking neurodiversity in the workplace. So I'm thinking corporations. But then I had nonprofits ask me to do webinars on the topic. I like a domestic violence and sexual assault nonprofit. I would have never imagined that. And then I had all different sectors. Like, it wasn't just high tech. It was insurance companies or financial companies, or the United Way actually approached me at one point. So I realized, wow, okay, this book can address more organizations than I thought. And then I realized there were educators who signed on and were so excited because we sent it out to my education mailing list, and they were excited about it and wanted to read it and leave reviews. And then I realized, how silly. Neurodiversity in the workplace. Schools are workplaces. Nonprofits are workplaces. Workplaces are anywhere and everywhere. So why not, reach out to even the people who I've been working with for decades, the educators and the nonprofits. So yeah, it really opened my eyes. I was thinking very narrowly and realized, oh, wow, through talking to people and putting it out there, I had more interest from different types of organizations than I ever imagined when I started.
It's such an interesting process. Lois Kramer is one of my more recent launch parties, and we did her launch, and she did a second edition of a book, and she's really, really well known in the professional speaker communities in the US and Canada. And she voiced some concern about pulling together a list of people to be on a launch team, like hundreds, Robbie. And then, she ended up with like 450 people initially, and probably close to 500 that she invited. Now, they didn't all sign up, right? But she probably asked like 600 people, and like 400 actually opted in, and she got 131 reviews.
Yeah.
And
it's impressive.
It's very impressive, but she had the scale. And so I also think like your numbers are impressive because the number of people on your launch team wasn't 500, right? Like, you had dozens, and of the dozens, like 50% of them signed up. And that's cool. I think that's part of what we're trying to do here, is create engagement. And it opened up your eyes to all the other possibilities of who else you could be selling to. And those conversations will continue to happen as a business owner. So I just know how much we pour into these books, money, time, effort, and there should be some payback. And initially we think the payback is like, we're going to sell 1 million books. Nope, that's not the payback. What is it then? Leveraging it to engage your network. I just want to encourage everyone to just like go ask 5 more people. Just like do it. And in fact, the 3 of you all met me most recently through the Kindle cross promotion campaign, which I do 3 times a year. We drop our Kindle book prices to 99 cents for 4 days. But we actually do that a couple of weeks before the campaign in order for me not to lose my mind managing 100 authors. But that means you have 2 weeks to kind of hey, can you get it done in the next 2 weeks? Because I'm about to be part of this campaign. So use that time 3 times a year, Lisa, to go, put the squeeze on the people who are on your short list. And Mara, it sounds like you've got a list of people you can go back to as well. So you're all doing great. And it's just a matter of like constantly, I mean, you market every day that ends in Y once you're an author. What was the challenge? I want to come over to Mara since, as a first-time author. I'm curious, other than the review process, which clearly has its ups and downs, was there something else you needed either to hire help for, or was there a mindset piece you had to get past? Because you've been thinking about this book for a long time. What was sort of kind of an obstacle that you overcame to get this book done?
I hired a writing coach, Kathy Sparrow. Excellent writing coach. She introduced me to you. I had all these ideas about what I wanted to write. I tried to write a book years before, but having been in academics for so long, having to write professional reports, like constantly having written, papers in graduate school, it was really, really hard for me to find my voice, to speak to people who are not in academics. So Kathy really helped me with that and finding my voice. The other part of it is I was trained as a psychologist not to really reveal too much about my personal life. We're taught that we're kind of like the blank slate. So I was not doing that, and my writing was boring, right? People don't want to read. They don't want to read academic books. They want to hear your story and they want to relate to it and find some similarity. Partway through, early on, my father passed away. And I'm not going to say that that was a good thing, but it was a good thing for my book in that I started using writing as my therapy. I started writing from the heart to help me heal through that grief. And I found that my writing was so much better. So I went back and rewrote everything that I had written before. And I started adding in more personal stories. And that has been what I've been doing since then. And in fact, my next book is also about my personal journey in helping my mom when she was in assisted living and nursing home, when she went to the hospital, in dealing with an ageist healthcare system, which as a professional, I knew a lot about, but as a family member, I was a deer in headlights. And so I'm writing the book that I wish that I had, but I learned a lot from this process that I really need to be personal. I need to give my personal story about what happened along the journey.
I'm so glad you're bringing that up, Mara, because particularly that piece of transitioning from academic writing to writing that we all want to read, I think it's a difficult thing for people. Prior to writing my first book, my only experience writing was papers for academia, and I didn't like writing for papers. It was not my fun thing. I still don't identify as a writer. I'm working on book 4. And I think partly it's because I had this idea of what a writer should be. I no longer have as much mental struggle with the idea of writing. I have found my ways to get the writing done and to really enjoy it. But a lot of it was finding my voice and realizing I could write the way I speak and that it's much more relatable. And I also love this idea of like bringing your own story and your client stories and illustrating your points so that people can connect to them. Kathy Sparrow, we're going to do another shout out. She's been mentioned before on this show. She's one of the BizBook Publishing Hub partners. These are some of the experts that we've gathered as part of this referral hub that can help entrepreneurs become successful authors. Everything from writing, editing, publishing, and marketing. You can even hang out with Kathy at one of our events. All that's at bizbookpublishinghub.com. And I'm so glad that you got a chance to work with her. I've heard so many good things. That you finding the right coach, though, the person who understands you and will push you in the right way, helping you find your voice and move through whatever that phase is that you're in to the next part of this process. Because a lot of it's like you can't even see around the corner, and having a guide like that is really helpful. I'm going to come over to Lisa, again, first time author. What was what was in your way? Where did you need help? What kind of support did you have? How did you figure this whole thing out?
Well, it certainly was. I've never taken on a project of this large scope before, and I pride myself on being sort of very, very organized, very methodical, very strategic about how I approach things. But frankly, you just can't approach a book that way. You can't start by writing a table of contents and then, just sit down and do each chapter. There's something fascinating about the creative process that I think deserves a little moment in the sun here to say, we can have the best intentions in the world, but we can't know what we don't know, and we can't see what's going to be possible when all the pieces come together. So I think that was a big part of my writing experience, was being able to share it, as I said, through a community writing program with others who were going through very similar things at very similar times, to remember very distinctly, one week, our instructor said, "You don't suck. It sucks. This is a sucky part of the process. You just reached a part of the process, but you don't suck." And I think that's what the hard thing is for a lot of authors, is they reach a moment where they say, "Ugh, I can't do this. It's just too hard. It's just too difficult. I'm just not good enough." And I think that's a really big misstep, and in the creative process, that is an inevitable low before you have a breakthrough that gets you to the next high. I also definitely had some challenges related to imposter syndrome. That journey of finding my voice was something very distinct. My focus changed a few times. I started out thinking, I'm going to write the quintessential book on how to change in 5 easy steps, or whatever you're going to write. And it just became so clear that I am not an expert in navigating personal change. No one is, except the person going through it. And I'm not qualified to tell anyone how to change their life. So when I really sat back, and I had a wonderful editor who gave me a writing therapy session where we talked through this, she said, maybe if you're not trying to be something that you're not, it will help you understand who you are in relationship to who might be reading your book. And that gave me a lot of clarity and permission and freedom to come out here and say, I'm not trying to tell anyone what to do, but I am trying to sit with you and help you ask important questions that can help you decide. And that's really kind of a breaking through moment for me in my writing. And in the book process, the title changed multiple times, the focus changed multiple times, and inevitably, I'm really grateful that it felt so much more like a co-creation. I'm a really big believer that each book has a consciousness of its own, and I am just a vessel for encouraging it to make its way out into the world. And so that felt really neat to me to really sit with that process. But it would have been really easy to give up multiple times. So I'm really glad I had a supportive community that understood from a very visceral level what I was going through, so that I could stick with it even through some of those really, really bumpy bumps.
I like that piece you said it, or your instructor said, like, this sucks. You don't suck. This sucks. Like, helpful when people can relate to that. I'm going to shift gears on Susan a little bit. Susan, I know you were like, oh, I was ready to answer that question myself. But Susan, you did something that's similar to a first-time author. You wrote for a new community. You wrote for a new revenue stream. You wrote for a new business model. There's a lot I think you can relate to with their experience of having to figure all that out. Whereas the books you had done previously, you'd built up over decades. Like, you knew what you were going to write about. You had firm expertise in that area. Like, you were recognized and known for what you knew and all that stuff. And now you're like, I'm going to grapple this big topic that is only, I would say, recently even a named topic in our world. Like, this is something that most of us were not discussing, and it's still often left out of DEI conversations when we're talking about how to create more accessible spaces. So how did you kind of match the book plan with your business? Like, what were you thinking? Is it about becoming like more speaking opportunities? Was there coaching and consulting? Were you trying to figure that out as the book was being evolved? What was your thought around the business piece of the fact that you now have a book with a totally new topic from what you had been doing for all those previous books?
That's a lot. Originally, I thought of it as something completely separate, and I had been hearing from a lot of my colleagues, Susan, you're an educator. You've been in education for over 30 years. No one in corporate is going to want to hear you. No one's going to want to see your message. Don't even waste your time. You're needed in education. Keep doing education. Don't go into neurodiversity. But I would sit on an airplane, especially when I had the luxury of being in first class, and I would listen to an executive, after he asked me what I did, say, "Oh, I have this employee who is just blah, 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 blah." And they'd ask me for my advice. And I realized that, oh my gosh, the kids that I've been helping in schools that I started teaching and then started helping teachers teach and helping other educators work with, speech pathologists, whoever, they grow up and they get a job. And then they're in the workplace, and the workplace doesn't know how to deal with their differences, their different way of being. Often they hide. They don't want to be seen, or they get fired because no one understands them. And sometimes they're really great talent. I mean, I was hearing from people, look, I've got this fabulous worker. He's amazing. He gets on the factory floor and he can look at what's happening in minutes, tell us what needs to be fine-tuned or fixed or, reorganized. When we've had all this experience, we're looking at him going, how did you see that? But he can't get the darn spreadsheet done for the metrics, so, so what do? He's got to do that part, but he's amazing here. So I realized that what I was doing all my life, all my career, was needed in the workplace. And the biggest thing that helped me make the shift, and I don't know if I'm still answering your question, but was I hired Mark Levy, who he's a divergent thinker himself. And he doesn't think like everybody else. He worked in the publishing sector. He helped other people like Simon Sinek find their voice and their wow, their how, their why, his why. And I thought, okay, let me talk to him. And I met him and I started talking with him, and he looked at me, and I'll never forget this. He said, "Susan, you can't hide that you're an educator. What are you going to do? They ask you, well, what have you been doing for the past 30 years? You're going to tell them you were in a witness protection program?" I'll never forget him saying that. Because you've got to embrace the fact that the reason that you're needed in this world, in this position, is because you have the practical experience and the depth of knowledge that from 30 years of working with this in education, that is what's missing in corporate. That's exactly what they need. And so I realized that when I wrote this book, my biggest obstacle was making it practical and making sure that, in every section of the book, pretty much there are real how-tos, just like teachers want to know, well, don't just tell me the theory. I want to know how to do it. Corporate leaders, the same thing. Don't just tell me it's a nice thing to do and it's wonderful and it's great for DEI. I want to know how, and I want to know how to get my ROI out of these employees and have a collaborative space. So I guess the biggest obstacle I had to make first was that I had the right to make this shift and that I really was needed. And I didn't have to hide the fact that I was an educator, because originally people were saying you need 2 different websites so people don't find your education stuff. And I just embraced it.
There is so much in correlation between your experience and a first-time author, because they're often not surrounded by authors. They're surrounded by people who don't understand how the book will ever help them. They can't even themselves articulate the benefits yet. They don't even know. It's kind of a lot of what Lisa said earlier. You can't imagine it. And they're holding you back because you're living your dreams. You're willing to go for it. And they're like, whatever, just keep clocking in the job, don't put yourself too far out there, all that stuff. And I think it's similar, like you had this established career and people were like trying to hold you back. And a lot of that's them, right? It's not really you. It's their own more narrow view of the world. And I think what you really are learning, and what a lot of people can take from this conversation, is how much of everything you've ever done is transferable experience to the things you are going to be doing next. Yeah. And that through line you just described of the students grow up to end up becoming workers in spaces that don't have the same there's no IEP at the workplace. And no one quite gets that they might need that, and they're smart and they could apply themselves and they could be wonderful additions to a community of employees, but they also may be very abrupt or too honest, or really
Don't
bad
make
social
eye
skills.
contact. Don't have a
Not
good
make eye-
handshake. Yeah.
Show up late. I mean, whatever it is, right? There's a zillion things that is behavior that we put demerit points next to. But I think smart employers are starting to realize this, and it's becoming a hot new topic. And you were smart to jump in with a really well-titled book, by the way, for a conversation I think people are ready for. And you're now part of that, which is really cool. In fact, I just included you. I'm hoping you stay in this HBR article I just wrote about neurodiversity as a networking for neurodiverse professionals. And I was loving the fact that I got to be like, oh, and let me reference someone personal experience who wrote a book on this. I think I would have known to reach out to you for that experience if you would just stay in the educator lane. So I want all of us to dream a little bigger. And I want you all also to think about what your best advice is. I'm going to go around in a second alphabetically. So a little heads up there. I want to know your best advice for a person who is writing a book to help them grow their business. So it's specifically why they're writing this book. So a lot of what Susan just said, I had this passion. I wanted to shift gears. I wanted to go into this new space. The book was a way to do that. With that, I'm going to come back to Lisa. Lisa, what is your, it could be something you've already said, something someone else has said, something new. What's your best advice for how folks might approach this journey?
Sure. Well, kind of 3-part. Stick with it. Stay true to who you are and your values, and absolutely trust your voice. There's a lot of noise out there, and there's a lot of, you have to do it like this. It won't meet someone here in this moment, but you're really running a version of a marathon here. And I'm no runner, but I do recognize that it takes a different goal in mind to really trust that you're going to attract the people who are going to meet you. And that mutuality is key to business growth and success.
I love it. I've actually taken that analogy of a marathon and expanded it, because I think a marathon, while hard, there's an end where you could just collapse. But it's actually more like a triathlon, or like maybe even an Ironman for some of us, because you first have to swim. Then you run, then you bike a really long distance, and then you go run a marathon. Like the phases of the writing, the publishing, and then the launch and marketing. It's a lot. And if you're not surrounded by the right people who get it, and you don't attract the people who will like want whatever you're writing, I think it'd be really hard. So I love what you're saying there. Mara, let me come over to you. What's the tip that you'd like to share?
I think, I agree with a lot of what you said, especially the marathon or the triathlon part. I think that it's really important not to expect instant gratification, that when you launch this book, all of a sudden you're not going to become a best-selling author. I mean, and you're going to sell 1 million copies. This launch process has been going on since 2018. I keep relaunching, and now I'm writing another edition. The other part of this is that, like you said, don't do it because you want to become a wealthy author. There are very few authors who really make it and become instant successes and make a lot of money doing it. It is, as you said, it's your card to get into doing other things. So have other ideas in mind, like courses you want to teach, or being a presenter, or writing more books. Maybe the next, the follow-ups will bring in more monetary gains. But if your goal is just, I want to write this book and make a lot of money, that's going to be disappointing.
Well said, and important to say, I think, that last piece you also said about knowing what else, right? Like if you write a book, and 50% of the people I meet with, I do a 30-minute complimentary book launch strategy session, and 50% of the people who come to me who have already published, I ask them 2 questions. Tell me about your book, and they can rattle on. They totally, no problem. Second question. So let's say I'm reading the book and I'm loving it. How do I find you? And what's the next thing I can do with you, paid or free? What's the connection between this book and your business? and they just they just can't. And that's a really hard place for me to implement a plan from, because if they don't know where they're going, then the map's not helping, right? Like, I can't help them. So at every stage of the writing and editing and design, everything you do in the book, make sure you're working with people who are asking you about the bigger purpose for this book, because it'll change over time, especially if it takes you years. I mean, it took you 13 years ago, you started talking about this book, right? Like, life changes a little bit over time. So your goals for it will change. It evolves. Have people who continuously ask you where you're trying to get, so they can help you get there. Let's come over to Susan. Susan, what would you like to share as someone who's done this multifold times, and then now as a reinvention? What would you add as some advice for these authors?
For people who want to write a book and haven't yet, especially, just start writing. I feel like when I can't tell you how many people I talk to that would be amazing authors. Like, they're doing things that other people would love to know how to do or more about. And they're like, oh no, I can't write a book. There's no way I could ever do it. And the reality is, nowadays there are so many ways to write, and I've used all of them. My first book was on the computer. It was pure torture. Just type. Journaling and typing. And now I can say that there are books that I've talked into a recorder while I was traveling across the desert to do work on a Navajo reservation. And then I uploaded it to Dragon Naturally Speaking, and then I had it corrected and edited, and that's how my book got made. This last one, I said, I'll do the article approach. And I wrote 90 articles on the topic. Then I took those articles and I literally, they're all on medium.com, and they give you a list of your articles. I printed out the list, cut out all the article titles, took a bunch of Tupperware cups and put the titles in the cup. And then I had the chapters of my book were all different colored Tupperware cups. There's a bunch of ways to do it. Speech to text, talking, all of that. I mean, writing, typing, journaling, hiring people to do it with you. I think just start writing and believe in yourself, whether you start with a journal, whether you start with an article, just start.
Susan, I'm having a flashback. 10 years ago, I'd left my day job and I start the process of, blogging. Very popular back then. And I, again, not a writer. At the time, I hadn't yet written my book. I wrote a blog post and I worked on it for weeks. Like, I would say 6-7 weeks. I asked like 4 people to review it. I mean, I met with someone at a coffee shop to review it. I don't even know if it was 600 words. I mean, this was not like an in-depth like essay. This was, not my like white paper. This was a blog post. And then I finally hit publish, and I said to my mentor, "What do I do next?" She said, "You write another article."
Yeah.
So, sometimes that's what we got to keep doing, and eventually you find your voice and your rhythm around it. So I love that you shared, like, there's a zillion ways, like you said, creative ways to get the writing done. And I think if writing is the problem, then don't do the writing, do it some other way. Speaking, I also created presentations, PowerPoint presentations, and wrote detailed slide notes. That was another way I tricked my brain into writing content. So all kinds of good stuff like that. Susan, how can people find you and follow your work?
The best way is to go to my website, susanfitzell.com. I am on Medium and on LinkedIn, but if you go to my website, you can access all my articles and my blogs, and you can access both sides of my business, the corporate association, nonprofit organizations, and the education side. There's a lot there that is free, and there's a lot of support. And if you want to reach me, there's a contact form.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mara. How about you? How can people find you and follow your work?
I think the best way is my website, which is drmarakarpel.com. So it's just my name all the way through with no dots or dashes. Everything is there. But you could go to Facebook and find me at Dr. Mara Karpel, Your Golden Years, which is the name of my podcast. You can find me on Medium just through my name, find me on Instagram through my name, on LinkedIn through my name. At my website are all my blogs that I've been doing for the past several years, and that is how I wrote my book, through starting with blogs.
Awesome.
Starting a coaching practice for families, helping their loved one through the system, an aging loved one. They can find all my podcasts that have been on since 2014.
Brilliant. Awesome. We're going to, by the way, all the links that are being mentioned are going to be available at bizbookpublishinghub.com. So definitely check that out. First, Lisa, how can we have people find you and follow your work?
Well, not to sound like a broken record, but you can also go to my website, which happens to be my name, DeAngelis.com. And likewise, websites have come so far. It's amazing to see what a wealth of information there is on each of us. So like the others have already mentioned, you can check out my podcasts, read my blog, look at what offerings I have available, read a little bit more about my book and my journey, and just grateful to everyone who takes a moment to support authors. It's really so meaningful and so heartwarming to connect and learn more about other people on this journey.
This is great. So we're going to put all those notes in the show notes at bizbookpublishinghub.com. Friends, you're going to find all the past shows there, as well as all the future episodes that are be coming out, in an invitation to attend a free virtual networking event for writers and authors to meet each other and our hub partners, who are the experts that can help guide you through your journey of writing, editing, publishing, and marketing. We also have a talk that I do that you can find there, and information about the Kindle cross promotion campaigns that I run 3 times a year. So a lot of information, all available at bizbookpublishinghub.com. I want to thank our panel once again for joining us. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.